Pokemon Legends Arceus is the most interesting Pokemon game that we have ever gotten. It took every little thing the Pokemon series was known for and changed it in some way, making a Pokemon experience that feels entirely unique. But just because a game is different doesn't mean it's good. So today I'm looking at every part of Legends Arceus to find out if it's really that good. Starting out with the changes because there were so many. Whenever I hop into a Pokemon game, whether it's one of the originals or a more recent title, I usually expect the same old thing. Battling trainers, collecting gym badges, catching Pokemon, and the whole 9 yards. And whenever a new game comes out, I'm still excited even though I know I'm getting pretty much the same thing. Wow, another Pokemon that looks just like Pikachu, but isn't. How creative. The first real home console Pokemon games that we got for the Switch were Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, and they were fine. They looked good and performed well, but they took away so many things from Pokemon that I had come to know and love just to attract a wider audience of people who hadn't played in a while, so they ended up feeling disappointing. And with Sword and Shield being the first new generation to be added to a home console, my expectations weren't super high and I managed to have a pretty good time, but there were still a load of issues with those games, so I can understand why a lot of people write them off as being the worst Pokemon generation. And then in 2021 we got Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which had so much potential but were rushed out for the holidays just to get a game on the shelves, so I ended up with 3 Pokemon experiences in a row that were pretty good but still wildly underwhelming. And after watching all the trailers, I knew I was gonna buy Legends Arceus because it's a Pokemon game and I'm a coward, and I went in extremely skeptical that all these changes were going to work. Because if you look at these two games side by side, then you would never think that they released within 2 months of each other. The game starts off in a wild way, with your character waking up in the void, where the Pokemon equivalent of God steals your phone, gives it an upgrade, and then sends you into the past. Where am I and why do you have my phone? You need to sign a 2-year contract. You wake up on the beach surrounded by a gaggle of Pokemon and this guy named Professor Laventon who has an interesting choice in headwear. He brings you to Jubilife City, and at this moment I realized this game was going to be better than I thought. Not only is it a really cool concept that you're sent to the past with no memory of how you got there, in a way similar to the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, which I absolutely adore, the villagers watched you fall from the sky and they are understandably skeptical that you are allowed in town at all. In other Pokemon games, you wake up in a house and talk to your family. Well, except for Generation 3 where you're being moved like furniture. But for the most part, Pokemon games start in a very similar fashion. And for this to be different made me feel like Pokemon was trying something new, which was what they desperately needed at the time. And once you start to explore the world, everything else makes sense. The standard Pokemon game follows the basic same pattern. It's a turn-based combat game where you go from town to town battling different trainers in order to collect gym badges and become the Pokemon League champion. In the older Pokemon titles, there were random encounters, but starting in Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, you could finally see Pokemon wandering around in the overworld. And Sword and Shield expanded on that, but both games struggled to make me believe these Pokemon were there for a reason other than that they just needed Pokemon in the game. They would just walk around aimlessly doing nothing, which was a step in the right direction because it makes way more sense than random encounters, but it felt like it was only about 80% of the way to a good system. But Legends Arceus took this idea and ran with it, making it so Pokemon in the overworld actually walk around and interact with the environment. You'll see Pokemon hanging out in groups, and if you watch them for long enough, they'll even fall asleep. And though it wasn't perfect, it was still a step in the right direction, and I absolutely love it. Depending on the species of Pokemon you're watching, it's going to behave differently. While some Pokemon run away, others will try and maim you, which was an insane idea and something that I had always wanted in the series. It never made sense to me that if I lost all of my Pokemon in battle, that I would just have to scurry off to the Pokemon Center. I had figured the Pokemon I'm battling would probably be upset about it and then try and get me next. And this time around, Pokemon are looking for a reason to end your life. And they really lean into that idea, offering a bunch of ways to navigate the world in order to survive. You can sneak around or charge headfirst into battle, and there's really no wrong way to do it. I will murder you. Oh, sweet heavens! Pokemon encounters are completely different than they used to be. In modern games, you walk up to a Pokemon and start a Pokemon battle like in every other Pokemon game that we have ever gotten. You battle the Pokemon to either lower its health to catch it or knock it out for XP. But Legends Arceus gives you a new choice. This time, you don't have to battle these Pokemon at all. You can sneak around and throw Pokeballs at them in order to catch them. And looking back at the trailers, I was not sold on this idea. I thought it was going to be a weird gimmick that I didn't want to use, similar to the Let's Go catching mechanics in Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. But I am willing to admit when I am wrong, and I was incredibly wrong. Sneaking around and waiting for the right moment to get a critical catch is something that I do just for fun. There are different kinds of Pokeballs that have different properties when you throw them, and from the moment I caught my very first Pokemon, I knew that they were onto something special. And if you run out of Pokeballs, you don't have to go and buy more. You can craft them out of the supplies that you gather from around the world. Another option where you don't have to do it, but it's so nice to be able to. But if you're one of the people who doesn't like this system, you don't have to do it at all. You can still battle wild Pokemon the standard way the series is known for. Lowering a Pokemon's health to catch it works just as well as it did in the games in the past. And having the option to do both is something that I adore. My biggest complaint with the Let's Go games is that the Let's Go mechanics were completely forced. So if you were someone who didn't want to use them, you had to deal with it. But if you don't like the mechanic, you don't have to use it. Though it was encouraged, it was never forced, and that was a beautiful way to introduce a new mechanic. Battling Pokemon also got a complete overhaul. Just like in the anime, in order to get into a Pokemon battle, you don't walk into a Pokemon because again, they will kill you. You throw your Pokeball with a Pokemon inside of it at a wild Pokemon and it starts a standard battle. And though it's a small change, I really like this. The battle takes place wherever you are currently standing, so there's no background images like you got in older Pokemon games, it's just wherever you currently are. It makes it feel like the world is alive and that you're an actual trainer going on their Pokemon journey. You're able to walk around during a Pokemon battle and get a different view of the action. And if you want to run away from a Pokemon battle, you can just run away from it. You don't have to hit the runaway button, you can just turn around and leave. This level of immersion is something that Pokemon should be looking for in all of their games. And they didn't just stop there, because the battles themselves also have new mechanics. After you use a move a certain amount of times, you unlock the ability to select a agile or strong version. Both agile and strong moves use 2 PP instead of 1, where agile attacks allow you to move faster for less damage, and can even allow you to attack multiple times in a row. Strong moves have you move slower, but do an incredible amount of damage. And though I didn't end up using these all that often, it was a good idea that worked well. The core Pokemon formula doesn't change all that much from game to game. Pokemon found out what works for their games and has stuck with it throughout all of the different generations. And I completely understand if they don't want to make a giant change like this for a main series title, but this should be proof that people are ready and willing for Pokemon to make a bold change in their core gameplay mechanics. So for changes to the gameplay, I'm giving them a 10 out of 10. Unlike most Pokemon games that come out, Legends Arceus is a standalone title. For the first time in a very long time, you don't have to worry about what Pokemon game you should buy. There is one choice, and it is so refreshing. I'm not somebody who hates the split release system that Pokemon goes for. Back when it was still an option, I would always get the deluxe version over the standard games because it was always the best overall package. But with this being a standalone game, that means there are no version exclusives at all. Legends Arceus has 242 Pokemon available in the game, and there is a good variety in the Pokemon that you can select. I never felt like I was being forced to use a certain Pokemon at any point in the game. I would walk around and catch whatever Pokemon I wanted, and if I saw a Pokemon that I wanted on my team, I would just put it on my team. In some Pokemon games, especially in the early titles, you're forced to use certain Pokemon because you need them for HMs. But thankfully, there are no HMs in this title at all. They're replaced by using regional Pokemon in order to traverse the environment. Whether you're riding around on a Wordeer or surfing on a Basculegion, every part about traversal in this game feels natural. The system of riding Pokemon replaces HMs in the best way possible. They're unlocked naturally through the story and not held back just because you don't have a certain gym badge to enable you to fly.
Alright, Psyduck, use Flash.
Oh my god!
Oh no, I'm so sorry, ma'am.
My big problem with HMs in the older Pokemon titles is that it makes it so I have to replace a Pokemon I want with a Pokemon that I need. And I would be forced to have a certain group of Pokemon on my team just because it has a move that I need. The problem was never locking traversal behind certain points in the game, because that in itself is a good idea. It encourages players to go back and explore areas they may have missed otherwise. And it allows the developers to stagger Pokemon levels in areas because you can only reach these points if you've met certain requirements. But most importantly, the traversal is just fun. Flying around these wild areas and encountering Pokemon that you didn't even know were there is something that I had a blast doing, especially when you encounter a alpha Pokemon, which is one of the coolest things about this game. Alpha Pokemon are the biggest and baddest Pokemon in a certain area. These are giant versions of your favorite Pokemon that have boosted stats and levels and overall are absolute menaces. There is something so satisfying about battling and catching an alpha Pokemon and adding it to your team that I will never get tired of. I felt a true sense of fear being chased by alpha Pokemon because I wildly overestimated my own abilities because I'm used to Pokemon games being an absolute breeze. And don't even get me started on the noble Pokemon. Nobles are a step above alpha Pokemon and they serve as the boss battles for this game. The battles start out as real-time engagements where you're throwing things at the Pokemon in order to weaken them. All the while, the Pokemon are trying to put you on a t-shirt. And after a certain point, you battle the Pokemon just like a standard Pokemon battle, and it comes together to be a perfect system. Battling the noble Pokemon quickly became my favorite part of this game. And they proved to be pretty difficult, especially when you replay them in the postgame. Timing your dodges is important, and if you mess it up, you die. And for this to be a completely new system that has never been in a Pokemon game before and having it work this well is something I hope they carry over in some capacity in all of the future Legends titles. And though this technically wasn't a new region, there were still some new Pokemon that were added to the game. There's a good selection of new Hisuian forms available in this region. And being entirely transparent, on my first playthrough, I wasn't the biggest fan of any of these new forms.
Did I just hear you say you hate Hisuian Voltorb? Yes. Oh, well, you're entitled to your own opinion, even if it's wrong.
After recently replaying the game, I've started to like the new Hisuian forms a lot more than I originally did. Especially Zoroark and Growlithe's new forms look really nice. Maybe it's because in Pokemon Violet we just got a bunch of robots for their regional forms, but as time has gone on, these have grown on me because I do like what they went for with all these designs. And that is especially true with the selection of starter Pokemon. Legends Arceus did something that no other Pokemon game has dared of doing, which is reuse starter Pokemon from prior generations.
Reuse? Oh, great heavens.
Though it's called Hisui, this is just the Sinnoh region, but in the past, so when the early trailers came out for the game, I just assumed we were gonna get the same Sinnoh starters we had come to know and love. But surprisingly, we got Oshawott, Cyndaquil, and Rowlet as our starter Pokemon. And as much as I love them, I would still rather have this ragtag group of starters than the same group of Pokemon that we just got in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But the best part of this is that all three of these Pokemon have a Hisuian form for their final evolution. The new forms have different types and stats and are a refreshing take on these Pokemon that I have come to know and love. Even if Hisuian Samurott is pretty much the same. And Dialga and Palkia finally got origin forms that I have been wanting for such a long time. It has never really made sense to me that Giratina had an origin form while Dialga and Palkia did not. And I'm not sure if Pokemon made this just to shut me up, but I am entirely fine with it because this is exactly what I wanted.
Midas, why are you sending so many letters? I just had to thank everybody at the Pokemon Company individually. How much money are you spending every month on stamps?
From top to bottom, Legends Arceus was a refreshing Pokemon experience. Having a single release Pokemon game where I can complete the Pokédex on my own is incredibly nice. So for Pokemon variety, I'm giving this game a 8.5 out of 10. Like I said before, Hisui is just Sinnoh of the past, but by playing the game, you could probably never tell. This is clearly a very different format than any other Pokemon game we've gotten, and it shows when you're exploring the world. Jubilife Village serves as your hub world, and you go back and forth to different zones as the game progresses. Though it gives off the appearance of being an open world game, these are all controlled zones that you have to enter and exit before you go to another. Each zone is similar to the wild area from Sword and Shield, but offers a very distinct experience. All of the zones function in pretty much the same way, with Pokemon scattered all around and plenty of resources to collect. Unlike a typical Pokemon game that keeps you on a linear route, this gives you the freedom to explore and get from point A to point B however you choose to do it. I figured this was gonna fall into the same trap that Sword and Shield's open world did, where there was no reason to explore the wild areas outside of picking up items here and there. But thankfully I was wrong, because there are plenty of reasons to go and check out every unique area you can find. Whether you're fighting alpha Pokemon, running for your life, or collecting resources to build better items, there are secrets to uncover and Pokemon to find depending on where you are. As the game progresses, you get more and more zones to explore. But no matter how many times you go back, you are never truly done exploring a zone. Whenever you get a new Pokemon for traversal, you have more options to go back and explore all of these old zones that you had already been to. And doing so rewards you with a new selection of Pokemon, some great items, and even more fun to be had. When you play a standard Pokemon game, everybody gets relatively the same experience. Keeping the game on a set path does keep the game flowing the right direction, but it also comes at the cost of giving a unique experience to every player. But in Legends Arceus, you're given the freedom to take on the world however you choose to do so. The freedom to explore makes the Pokemon experience all the more real. And unlike other games in the series, when I play this again, it still feels new every time I do. But not only is exploring the world fun, it's also incredibly deep and rich. When I go back and play games like Platinum, I always have a great time exploring the Sinnoh region. There is so much detail and story to be found in the world, and even though a lot of the games don't do it justice, Sinnoh is still one of the best regions to explore in a main series Pokemon game. And I was worried they were going to take too many creative liberties and make this feel like a brand new region rather than being Sinnoh of the past. But they still managed to fill this game with so much of the charm that Sinnoh was known for. There is just something about the way the world is set up, whether it's the architecture or the way you're allowed to progress, that nailed exactly what they were going for, the Sinnoh region of the past. Of course, the region's not going to feel like it did in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum because it's really not the same thing. They managed to design a Pokemon experience that stayed true to the core of the formula, that still managed to give everybody a unique adventure while playing. So for region design, I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I'm going to do my best to keep this relatively spoiler-free. Time travel is a very hard thing to pull off when you're writing a story. Most of the time, whenever I hear about a story delving into the idea of time travel, it immediately turns me off. But after experiencing the story, Legends Arceus managed to do it almost perfectly. I, like most people, am used to how a main series Pokemon game works. It doesn't matter which of the games I pick up, I can hop into any of them extremely easily. But with Legends Arceus changing so many things, it was like my first Pokemon experience all over again. It was like I was thrown into a world where I had no idea what was happening.
Oh, I get it now. Finally, it took you long enough. The legend is the friends we made along the way. Respectfully, what does that even mean?
As someone who has gotten so used to how Pokemon games work, any change to the formula seems like it would be daunting. But they managed to do a great job using time travel as a way to guide the player into the new mechanics. And they built on that idea throughout the story, so it didn't feel like you were just traveling back in time for the sake of them setting up a loose narrative. With this taking place so far in the past, the typical progression that we see, like a gym system, is non-existent. But in its place, we have a brand new system of quests. In Jubilife Village, you're given a load of different tasks that you need to complete, all with the overall goal of figuring out why these rifts are forming in the sky. With Jubilife Village being the only town in the entire game, most of the things that you do come out of this hub, which means you're not going out and meeting a bunch of new characters throughout the story, you meet the same group of people throughout the entire game. Which works in this game's favor because you build strong connections with the people of the town. Everybody has the same goal and you're just working to achieve it. You will meet different groups like the Diamond and Pearl clan who are all working towards the same goal even though they have different methods to get there. And you learn a lot from all these characters about the early ages of Pokemon, but you're teaching them about things that have progressed in the modern age, like people and Pokemon working together. The people of the world are extremely wary around Pokemon, and that's most likely because the Pokemon will try and eat them. But when you come into the picture, you teach them that people and Pokemon can live together in harmony. So you're not only learning about the past, you're also influencing the future. They moved away from the idea of exploring a region, collecting gym badges with the goal of being a champion, and they replaced it with an incredible story of uncovering the mysteries about why the world is behaving the way it is. There's no big bad villain organization or gym leaders that you meet throughout the game, which meant that I got a lot more time with the characters they chose to introduce, which made it so they could flush out these characters' goals and ambitions and gave them so much personality, which is something the modern Pokemon games desperately need. And now that I've gotten a taste of that in a modern Pokemon game, all I want is for them to do this more often. I could go on for hours about how this is a refreshing take on a Pokemon story. The characters you meet and the places you explore are some of the best we've gotten in a very long time. And my only real complaint is that the pacing of the story is a little slow towards the early half of the game, but that's because they have to reteach you the entirety of the Pokemon formula because this is a brand new experience. So for story, I'm giving this a 9.5 out of 10. And with all of that being said, I think that Legends Arceus is the best Pokemon game that we have gotten on the Nintendo Switch. I can't say it's a perfect game because it absolutely has issues, but if I was going to recommend any of the Pokemon games that released on the Nintendo Switch, this would be the one I picked 100% of the time.
Hello?
Hey, it's God. I'm sending you to the past.
No, please don't! There's no air conditioning. I'm going to die.